With these walks through the Madrid of Father Claret, we intend to guide you in the footsteps of an extraordinary man, Saint Anthony Mary Claret, who lived 11 years of his eventful life in this city. In this first walk, we are going to follow in his footsteps through the oldest part of Madrid, an area that Claret knew very well, because there you will find the royal palace, the place where he had to go every week to carry out his function as confessor to the Queen, and where you will also find the only statue of Claret in Madrid, in front of the Almudena Cathedral. Enjoy the walk. Itinerary of the first tour from Opera to La Latina. We start at the Opera Square. From there, we walk to the Royal Palace. We shall visit the Royal Chapel. We approach the Cathedral of La Almudena. Next, we head to the Church of Santa Maria la Real. We turn left towards the Church of San Nicolas. We shall cross the Plaza Ramales. We then move on to the nearby Church of Santiago. A short walk takes us to the Plaza de la Villa. We continue along Calle Mayor and we find the Iglesia del Sacramento. We cross the viaduct and stop in front of the Colegio del Carmen. We stop at the Church of San Francisco El Grande. And we go up to the Church of San Andres, where we shall conclude our walk. We are in the Plaza of the Opera, formerly the Plaza de los Caños del Peral. Why are we starting this first walk through Father Claret's Madrid here? Because this is the site of the statue of Queen Isabel II. That is the reason for his presence in Madrid, since it was she who chose him as her confessor, although she had only seen him in a couple of times before and only in passing.
The statue is in this place because she reformed this square. Los Caños del Peral was the place where the washerwomen from the center of Madrid came to wash and where she had the opera house built.
And now we are going to go to the Royal Palace along Arenal Street, which was the street that Father Claret walked every Monday during the first 2 years of his stay in Madrid, since his first residence was in Carrera de San Jerónimo Street on the corner of Cedaceros, the current extension of Las Cortes. We are talking about the years 1857 to 1859. We are now in front of the Royal Palace, or Palacio de Oriente, the largest palace in Europe, where the Queen lived and Father Claret used to go to hear her weekly confession.
The Royal Palace is the work of two Italian authors, Filippo Huvara and Giovanni Battista Sacchetti, by order of King Philip V, the first of the Bourbons.
Father Claret visited the palace during his 11 years in Madrid as confessor to Queen Isabella II. Claret was already familiar with the palace. The first time he visited it was in 1850 when he went to Madrid to receive the episcopal pallium. Claret had requested an audience with the king and queen to bid them farewell on his way to Cuba. He began his personal relations with the queen on the wrong foot, because while he was busy preaching in the Church of Italianos, he arrived late at the palace when the king and queen were already retiring to rest after having waited for him in vain. He also occasionally devoted himself to teaching the catechism to the queen's children and servants. As part of his duties, Father Claret had to attend the banquets held at the palace, but these events made him suffer greatly. Among the banquets he attended were those he shared with the Nuncio Barilli, General Serrano, the Duke of Nemours, the Duke of Brabant, and the Empress of France, Eugenie de Montijo. Let us now look at the dome on the north side of the palace. It is the Royal Chapel. The chapel of the Royal Palace is the work of Ventura Rodriguez and is distinguished, as we have said, by a beautiful dome that stands out clearly. It is dedicated to Saint Michael the Archangel. It was here that Claret attended the christening of the future King Alfonso XII. Here he also personally baptized the Infanta Concepcion and prepared the Infanta Isabel La Chata for her marriage to Count Girgenti, in which he participated as an assistant. Some of these events can be seen in the paintings by Rafael Benjumea that are kept in the Royal Palace of Aranjuez. He also frequently attended episcopal consecrations there, and finally he was commissioned by the Pope to present Queen Isabella II with a golden rose as Catholic Queen in 1868. From here, we will now go to the brand new Almudena Cathedral next door. It is now time to visit this cathedral, which may remind us of the first project conceived and promoted by Father Claret, among others, although it is in the Puerta del Sol.
In addition to its layout, the work of the Marquis of Cubas and reformed by Chueca Goetia, this cathedral, whose construction took more than a century, has several works of art inside. The Cristo Crucificado by Juan de Mesa, 17th century, the canvas by Matteo Ricci of the Expolio, 17th century, the Almudena altarpiece by Juan de Borgoña, 17th century, the Ark of the Almudena by Juan de Borgoña, 17th century, and the mortuary chest of San Isidro, 12th century.
Outside the cathedral and next to the pavement, we come across to the statue of St. Anthony Mary Claret, placed here in 1999. The statue reminds us, in addition to his role in the conception of a cathedral in Madrid, of his frequent passage through the area on his way to the Royal Palace in the last 9 years of his presence in Madrid, when he would come to the palace along the Calle Mayor from his new residence in the Plaza de Anton Martin. We leave the Vega slope on the right, where we can see part of the primitive Arab wall, and the niche where the image of the Virgin of the Almudena appeared during the Reconquest.
She was found in a cube in the wall, which served as the town's Almud in the year 1085. She was the patron saint of Madrid. The image was first moved to the Church of Santa Maria, and from there in 1777 to the nearby Church of the Convent of the Sisters of St. Bernard in Calle Sacramento, where it was worshipped until its transfer to the crypt of La Almudena in 1911. It is currently located to the right of the transept of the new cathedral, as we have already seen.
We now cross Calle Balyen and enter Calle Mayor, where Claret came to the palace during the last 9 years of his stay in Madrid. Here we can see a tombstone that reminds us of where the Church of Santa Maria used to stand.
This church, which would later be called Santa Maria la Real de la Almudena, was undoubtedly the oldest of Madrid's parishes. It was built in the early years of the 16th century on the site of an earlier, possibly Arab, mosque. In the mid-18th century, it was restored, mainly inside, by Ventura Rodriguez. It was destroyed for urbanistic reasons in 1869. Only the bell remains, which is now in the current Almudena Cathedral. The image of Our Lady of Almudena was venerated in this church.
It was in this church that Claret celebrated and presided over the Corpus Christi procession for several years.
The procession always started from this church and had the following itinerary: Calle Mayor, Puerta del Sol, Caritas, Atocha, Plaza Mayor, Ciudad Rodrigo, and back to Santa Maria. Some of these streets were covered with sand, and blue and white awnings were placed from one facade to another. The carriage carried the sacrament in a monstrance carved by the silversmith Francisco Alvarez in 1560. It is currently housed in the cathedral chapel.
Don Carmelo Sala declared in the informative process,
"One day when we were in the church of Santa Maria in Madrid, he, Father Claret, knelt down, remaining as if static, as he was accustomed to, prostrating himself before the Holy Sacrament. And after we went outside the church, he said to me, 'The Lord has told me that the book was well written,' referring to that of the well-instructed seminarian."
Continuing along Calle Mayor and turning left outside the original wall, where the Santa Maria gate was, we take Calle de San Nicolas, where we will soon come across one of the most attractive corners of Madrid, the Plaza de San Nicolas. The Servite Church of San Nicolas is located there. San Nicolas de los Servitas is the oldest surviving church in Madrid. It may have been one of the most transformed into a Christian temple after the conquest of the city by Alfonso VI.
Its tower was once an Arab minaret and dates from the 12th century. It is in the Romanesque Mudahar style. The Mudahar carpentry ceiling and the Gothic vaulting of the chancel, 14th and 15th centuries, are noteworthy. Due to its small parish and its ruinous state, it was joined to that of El Salvador, and the church was abandoned until 1825, when it was handed over to the Italian congregation of the Servite Third Order. A fun fact: the poet and warrior Alonso de Arcia was baptized in this church, although the whereabouts of his remains are unknown. The famous architect Juan de Herrera, builder of El Escorial and the Toledo Bridge, was also buried here. From this church, a procession would depart, heading for one of the largest churches in Madrid. This procession would formally begin the first 2 weeks of Lent. Another procession would return to this church at the end of Lent.
In a chapel of the church, we can see the image of the Sorrowful Virgin that accompanied the procession. We know that Father Claret celebrated Lent here in 1858 and 1864. Leaving this church and following the street of San Nicolas, we reach the Plaza de Ramales, leaving on the right the house where the Count Duke of Olivares, the favorite of Philip IV, lived. Plaza Ramales was the location of the Church of San Juan Bautista, one of the first parishes in Madrid where the great painter Diego Velázquez was buried and whose remains still rest in some unknown place in this square.
A monolith and street gravestones remind us of this personage. Felipe Guevara, the first architect of the royal palace, was also buried in this church.
Continuing to the right along Calle de Santiago, we come to the square of the same name, watched over by the facade of the Church of Santiago. The parish church of Santiago was one of the oldest in Madrid. It was demolished in 1808 by order of José I, and it was rebuilt in 1811 by the neoclassic architect Juan Antonio Cuervo. This parish was given the title of San Juan after the demolition of its church.
Inside the church are paintings of Santiago Matamoros by Francisco Ricci, Francis of Assisi by Alonso Cano, and the Baptism of Christ by Carreño. The martyr Pedro Torres de Miranda and the Blessed Maria Ana de Jesus were baptized in this parish, and the body of Lara, who committed suicide in a nearby house in Calle de Santa Clara, was laid to rest here. Here, at Lara's burial, the great poet José Zorrilla gained fame for some verses he spoke.
In June 1862, the Royal Arts Confraternity of Our Lady of Health celebrated a solemn Triduum to its patron saint in this parish, with Father Claret officiating. Taking care to keep our bearings as we leave the church and head towards the Plaza de la Villa along Calle Señores de Luzon. We find ourselves in the Plaza de la Villa. The contemplation of the square as we reach the Calle Mayor, as well as a great sense of placidity, will help us to remember the frequent passage of Father Claret through this place on his way to the royal palace during the 9 years that he lived in the Plaza de Anton Martin.
Highlights in the Plaza de la Villa include the Madrid City Hall, the work of Gómez de Mora, the House of the Lujanes, the oldest civil building preserved in Madrid, and the so-called House of Cisneros. But the absence of a church in this old main square of the town should not go unnoticed. In fact, in the Calle Mayor, a tombstone reminds us of the place occupied by the Church of San Salvador, a church that Father Claret did not get to know.
And now let us go back along the Calle Mayor toward Sacramento Church, today's military cathedral. Behind this monument, which reminds us of the failed attempt on Alfonso XIII's life on his wedding day, is the Church of the Sacramento. The Bernardine Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament founded their convent in Calle Sacramento in 1615. Its founder was the Duke of Uceda.
In 1979, the Bernardine nuns moved to Boadilla del Monte in Madrid, and their convent on Calle Sacramento was demolished to build houses. Their church is now the cathedral of the Vicariato General Castrense. This church was completed in 1744. It is large, with the normal facade, and was later renovated with paintings on the vaults. The architects include Gomez de Mora and Francisco Bautista, although it was Andrés Esteban who finished it. In the nave and transept, also Baroque, there is a dome with a luminous lantern. The frescoes on the ceiling are all by Luis González Velázquez and his brother Alejandro. The main altarpiece is neoclassical. The large canvas with St. Benedict and St. Bernard before the sacrament is by Gregorio Ferro. The side altarpieces are in a beautiful Rococo style.
We know that Father Claret celebrated a solemn liturgy here on the feast of the Prince of Asturias in 1859, and in two other occasions he presided over the procession and preached on the occasion of the 40 Hours and the Corpus Christi Novena in 1862 and 1865, respectively. Leaving the Calle Mayor again, we pass on the left the imposing building known as the Capitanía General, the former palace of the Dukes of Uceda, the work of Juan Gomez de Mora in 17th century, where among others Don Juan of Austria, Victor of Lepanto, and Doña Mariana of Austria lived. And now we venture across the famous viaduct on our way to the Church of San Francisco El Grande. We stopped just past the viaduct on the way to San Francisco El Grande to point out several places that should not be overlooked.
On the left is the district of La Moreria, where Moorish people used to live. On the right, we come to Las Vestillas, where the Madrienos gather to celebrate their patron saint's festivities. Behind it is a building of considerable size. This is the Diocesan Seminary of Madrid and the faculty of San Damaso.
Let us continue ahead until we reach the Plaza de San Francisco El Grande. Having arrived at the Plaza de San Francisco El Grande, we will look first at the building on the corner. It is the Colegio del Carmen. The Carmelites of Charity, which Father Claret Terciaries, had recently been founded in Madrid in 1865. One of the three founding nuns was Dolores Claret, niece of the Queen's Confessor. Let us listen to what was written in the chronicles of the time.
They had only recently moved to the new building in the Panzuela de San Francisco, still unfinished, when their Royal Highnesses, the Infantes Dukes of Montpensier, accompanied by the three Infantas, visited the home for orphans and servants and the school of El Carmen, being received by Father Claret. It was the month of June, 1857.
It is interesting to know that one of the members of that Council of Sunday School Instruction was Saint Michaela of the Blessed Sacrament.
On July 16, 1857, Father Claret celebrated a Mass inaugurating this chapel. On June 10, 1860, he distributed the prizes to the girls. And in November 1863, he gave the spiritual exercises to the Carmelites of Charity. On June 20, 1865, Their Majesties and the Infanta Isabella visited the orphanage and were also received by Archbishop Claret.
Once, writes Mother Paula de Puig, when he was giving exercises to the sisters and girls of the School of Our Lady of Carmen in Madrid, on the last day, after the general communion which he himself gave, he gave them a sermon of thanksgiving, pondering the great love of God, and he was ecstatic, as the sisters told me, and all those who were in the church were moved with emotion, and some of them wept. When he came back to himself, he left without saying a single word. By coincidence, I was arriving just as he was leaving, and he asked me, "Were you in the church?" And I told him no. And he said to me, "I wish that you had been there, because I wanted to ask you what happened to me, because some people are crying." And I told him, "Nothing. Perhaps you lost yourself in the sermon." And in his saintly simplicity, he answered me, "That's what it must be."
And now we are in front of one of the most beautiful churches in Madrid, a church to stop and contemplate inside and out, San Francisco El Grande.
The convent of San Francisco was undoubtedly the oldest in Madrid, after the Benedictine monastery of San Martin. Earlier historians already speak of a chapel by the river in the early years of the 13th century. This chapel was converted into a church, and was the burial place of important families such as the Lujanes, Vargas, Luzones, and so on. Queen Juana and her husband, Don Enrique IV, were also buried there. That church and the convent were destroyed in 1760, and another one was built 25 years later by the architects Fray Antonio Cabezas, Plo, and Sabatini. This is the church we can still see today. Let us move on to the interior. The high altar, dating from 1860, is made of white marble. The paintings in the apse choir were completed in 1885. In the chapel of St. Bernardine, Goya's painting depicts the saint preaching before Alfonso V, King of Aragon and Naples. The white marble pulpits, carved by Pedro Nicoli, are 13 feet high, and each sounding board above the pulpit weighs almost 4 tons. Pope John XXIII elevated this church to the dignity of a minor basilica through an apostolic letter on February 2nd, 1963.
According to the Chronicles, in June 1861, the sons of Saint Francis celebrated a solemn function for the saint, which was attended by the Infantes Don Francisco and Don Sebastian with Father Claret. After the ceremony, they were invited to refreshments in the chapter hall. In January 1863, Archbishop Claret distributed the prizes to the Sunday pupils of the court in this church.
The event,
The newspaper La Esperanza tells us,
was moving, seeing a multitude of young maids gathered there who, instead of giving themselves up to distraction and leisure on holidays, when they are allowed to go out freely, spend the afternoon in instruction, both in doctrine and in the principles of education most necessary to their state, directed by illustrious priests and ladies of distinguished class who have voluntarily and generously taken on such a painful and salutary task. Archbishop Antonio Maria Claret, who presided over the meeting and was in charge of awarding the prizes, after giving a very eloquent talk to his audience in which he explained with greatest clarity the maxims of Christian morality that are indispensable for the fulfillment of their duty to people who depend on another higher will, distributed the prizes awarded to those who had deserved them for their application and good behavior, which consisted of dresses, handkerchiefs, books, rosaries, prints, and other objects.
At the exit, take the street opposite San Francisco El Grande. As far as the Plaza de la Cebada, where the Church of San Andres is located. The former parish church of San Andres was in the small square of the same name with a turn to that of Angosta de los Mancebos. The position occupied by this church would have been that of the main mosque of the Almudena.
It was built in 1657 over another primitive church and the cemetery where San Isidro, patron saint of Madrid, was buried. Even though in previous centuries this church had had a very wealthy and elite congregation, when it was rebuilt, it was architecturally very plain. The church and the entire convent were lost in July 1936. When the parish church was rebuilt, the space of the antechapel of San Isidro and the adjoining space of the church, corresponding to the chancel, was used, although its orientation was changed, today facing more towards the north. The rectory was built on the eastern side, at the head of the original Gothic church. On the outside, only the west wall and the attached tower remain. Inside, we can see where the tomb of San Isidro was, which is also where the main altar of the church is today. This was the resting place of San Isidro until 1767, when his remains were moved to the church of San Isidro. Claudio Coello, La Rodana, and others were also buried in the vault of San Andres. Juan Lopez de Hoyos, Cervantes' teacher, was the parish priest of this church.
Evidence shows that on June 2, 1861, Father Claret officiated at the pontifical liturgy in this church, and in February 1864, he preached a week's mission, and from what is reflected in the newspapers of that time, the turnout must have been extraordinary. This is the end of the walk, but first we can make two visits. Behind the Church of San Andres is the Bishop's Chapel, one of the most beautiful works of art conserved in Madrid. Next to the church is the recently constructed building on the site where the house of Ivan de Vargas was located and where San Isidro lived, and where the well of the miracle is located, where the waters rose to bring back the son of San Isidro and Santa Maria de la Cabeza, San Ilian. We hope you enjoy the walk.